The hospital room was cold, the kind of cold that seeped deep into your bones. Mr. Duncan stood at the doorway, staring at the empty bed where his wife had just taken her last breath. His heart shattered in that moment. Christiana, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was gone, taken from him just like that. The beeping of the machines, once a reassuring sound, now felt like a cruel reminder of the void she had left behind. In his arms, 2 tiny, helpless lives squirmed, their newborn daughters, Lillian and Millie. He had promised Christiana he would be a good father, that he would protect them both. But in that instant, he was gripped with doubt. How could he raise them alone? How could he give them everything they deserved without the love and support of the woman who had been his rock? "I'll take care of you both," he whispered, pressing his trembling lips to their soft foreheads. But the weight of that promise pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. Could he really do this? He didn't have the answers. But he knew one thing for certain. He was all they had now, and he would give everything to ensure they never felt the pain of losing their mother. The next few years passed in a blur of exhaustion and struggle. Alone, with no family to help, Mr. Duncan poured himself into raising his daughters. When the girls turned 5, desperate for stability, he remarried. But his new wife wasn't kind to the twins. In fact, she despised them. She called them bastards and made their lives miserable until the tension broke and their marriage ended in a bitter divorce. From that moment on, Mr. Duncan swore never to marry again. His girls were all that mattered. He would not let them suffer, not when he had the power to change their future. Determined to give them the education he could never afford, he made a choice that would change everything. He sold his carpentry shop, his only means of income, to pay for their schooling. The community mocked him. "Foolish," they said. "Girls will grow up, get married, and leave you behind. You'll have nothing." But Mr. Duncan didn't care. He wasn't doing this for them. He was doing this for Lillian and Millie. And so, with the last of his savings, he gave his daughters a chance at something better. The days blurred into one long, exhausting stretch. With each passing moment, Mr. Duncan learned a little more about what it meant to be a father. The mornings were the hardest. He would wake up before dawn, the weight of the world pressing down on him, knowing that his daughters depended on him for everything. There were no more late nights at the pub, no weekends off. His life now revolved around the rhythm of Lillian and Millie's needs, their cries, their laughter, their tiny hands tugging at him, demanding attention. He quickly learned to juggle the demands of childcare and the carpentry business, often working through the night to meet deadlines, his fingers covered in sawdust while his daughters slept soundly in the next room. He would pause now and then, glancing at them, his heart swelling with love and pride. But there was always the shadow of doubt. Was he doing enough? Was this the life they deserved? There were no answers. Just the quiet hum of determination that kept him going, even when his body screamed for rest. At the market, Mr. Duncan would hear the whispers. "He's raising them alone. Can't be done." Some would offer their condolences, while others simply stared, eyes filled with judgment. The town didn't understand why he had chosen to sacrifice his business for his daughter's future. "You've sold everything for girls," they'd say, their voices full of skepticism. "They'll grow up, get married, and leave you behind. All this sacrifice will be for nothing." But Mr. Duncan never let their words break him. Each time he held his daughters, each time he saw their innocent smiles, the doubt would fade. he wouldn't let them down. He couldn't. Not after everything Christiana had given him. One cold winter morning, when the girls were still small, Mr. Duncan sat at the kitchen table, his hands shaking as he counted the few coins left. There wouldn't be enough for both the school fees and food that month. The weight of the responsibility felt suffocating. For the first time, he felt like he might fail them. But then, as if by instinct, Millie tugged at his sleeve, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Papa, what are you doing?" she asked, her tiny voice full of innocence. He smiled, trying to hide his worry, and patted her head. "Just making sure we can get everything we need," he said, his voice strained. But Millie, ever perceptive, tilted her head, sensing his unease. She didn't understand the concept of money yet, but she knew enough to see the tension in his face. Lillian, seeing her sister's concern, climbed into his lap and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "We'll help you, Papa," she whispered. In that moment, all the exhaustion, all the self-doubt melted away. His daughters were so young, but they were already showing him what family truly meant. They were a team, and no matter how hard things got, they would face it together. The day he heard Lillian's first word, "Papa," his heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just a word. It was a promise, a reminder that despite everything, he was enough. He had to be, for them. Even as the girls grew, Mr. Duncan continued to face the challenges of raising them. The town's judgment never fully went away, and the financial strain continued to weigh heavily on his shoulders. But there were moments of joy that kept him going. When the girls learned how to ride their bikes, when Lillian helped him with the furniture, or when Millie insisted on drawing him pictures of the two of them, each sketch filled with love and laughter. Mr. Duncan began to realize that maybe it wasn't just about what he could give them in terms of material wealth. What he could give them, his steadfast love, his determination, and his sacrifice, would be enough to carry them through. He wasn't just raising his daughters to be strong women. He was raising them to understand the value of family, of love, of sacrifice. But the journey was far from easy. As school fees loomed for the twins, Mr. Duncan's carpentry business struggled to keep up. Even after working long hours, he still found himself struggling to make ends meet. The weight of responsibility was crushing, and sometimes, when the girls were asleep, he would sit in the dark and wonder if he was doing enough. The girls, growing older, began to understand. They saw their father's struggle, his sacrifice, and his unwavering love. And though they couldn't fully comprehend the depth of what he was doing for them, they knew one thing: they were his world. As the years passed, the reality of Mr. Duncan's situation became more apparent. His carpentry shop, once a thriving source of income, was now barely enough to cover the essentials. Each month, the bills piled up, and no matter how hard he worked, there never seemed to be enough. Yet every time he looked at his daughters, Lillian, who had developed a fascination with science, and Millie, who had a natural talent for engineering, he knew there was no other choice. The girls were growing fast, their dreams beginning to take shape. Lillian would often sit at the kitchen table, her head buried in books about space and the stars, while Millie would play with scraps of wood, trying to build miniature machines. They both had big dreams Mr. Duncan was determined to nurture, no matter the cost. But school fees were rising, and their educational needs were becoming more demanding. Mr. Duncan was torn. He had already sacrificed so much for their future, but now it felt like the very ground beneath him was slipping away. There was no more room to maneuver, no more loans to take, no more savings to dip into. The pressure was building, and he was running out of time. One chilly autumn morning, after a long, sleepless night spent working on a furniture order, Mr. Duncan sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The twins were asleep upstairs, their quiet breaths the only sound in the house. His heart ached as he glanced at the pile of unpaid bills. If he didn't find a way to pay for their education soon, the girls would have to drop out. The thought of that crushed him. Everything he had worked for would be meaningless. He made the decision then, without hesitation. With a heavy heart, he walked to the local real estate office and signed over the deeds to his carpentry shop. It was the only asset he had left. His hands trembled as he handed over the keys, knowing full well that he was about to give up everything. But it was worth it. He had made a promise to his late wife and, more importantly, to his daughters, that he would give them a future. He returned home, feeling like a part of him had been ripped away. The house seemed emptier, the walls closing in on him. But when he saw the girls, their bright eyes and innocent smiles, the ache in his chest softened just for a moment. They were worth everything. As the days passed, the whispers in the community grew louder. The townspeople couldn't believe what Mr. Duncan had done. "A fool," they muttered. "He's given up everything for girls who will just marry and leave him." The judgment stung, but Mr. Duncan never let it show. He held his head high and carried on. The gossip didn't stop, though. They called him a dreamer, someone who had sacrificed his own future for a hope that would never be realized. "What's the point?" they'd ask. "Girls grow up, get married, and leave. They don't need education for that. What a waste of a good business." But Mr. Duncan couldn't hear them anymore. He refused to. He was determined to ensure that Lillian and Millie would have a better life than he had. And as long as he had the strength to work, to push through, he would give them every chance to succeed. Their future meant everything to him. When the girls found out about the sacrifice he had made, their faces lit up with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. They didn't understand the financial burden yet, but they could see the toll it had taken on their father. They could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of their dreams resting on his weary back. But they didn't cry or ask for anything more. Instead, they worked harder, studying late into the night, helping around the house, making sure their father didn't feel alone in this journey. They knew the sacrifices he was making, and they were determined to make him proud. One night, after a long day of work and study, Mr. Duncan sat at the table, exhausted but content. He watched as Lillian and Millie laughed together, sharing stories and dreams. There, in that small kitchen, he saw the first seeds of hope beginning to take root. He knew they were capable of great things. He didn't need the shop to believe in that anymore. They didn't need his business. They needed his love, his guidance, and his unwavering belief that they could rise above everything life had thrown their way. And that was enough. The years passed quickly, and with each passing day, Lillian and Millie grew more determined, more aware of their father's sacrifices. Though they were still young, they understood that their future depended not just on their ability to study, but on the love and sacrifice Mr. Duncan had poured into them every single day. Every morning, Mr. Duncan would rise before dawn, the soft sound of his work boots on the wooden floor echoing through their small home. He worked long hours, often late into the night, his hands rough and calloused from the endless projects. The girls, though still young, would often help in small ways, handing him tools, offering him water, or quietly sitting by him as he worked. It wasn't much, but it was their way of showing their appreciation for everything he had done for them. Lillian, always the dreamer, was fascinated by science. She would spend hours poring over books, her eyes wide with wonder at the stars, the planets, and the mysteries of the universe. On weekends, she would try to build small rockets from scrap wood and old cans, often dragging her sister along for the ride. Millie, the more practical of the two, had a natural knack for mechanics. She would spend hours tinkering with broken radios, trying to figure out how to make them work again. Together, they dreamed of a world they hadn't yet touched, a world where they could break free from the limitations of their small town. One day, when Lillian was about 8 and Millie was 7, Mr. Duncan sat them down at the kitchen table. He had been quiet for a while, his face etched with concern. The community's judgment still lingered in his mind. He had given up everything for their education, but doubts still crept in. Was it enough? Would they ever succeed? "Girls," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I've worked hard to give you a future. But it's not just about going to school. It's about doing something important with that education. You have dreams, I know you do, but you have to believe in them, no matter how big they are." Lillian looked up at her father, her eyes filled with determination. "I want to be a scientist, Papa. I want to study the stars and travel to places no one has ever been." Millie, always a little more grounded, nodded thoughtfully. "And I want to build things, Papa. I want to make machines that can change the world." Mr. Duncan felt a lump in his throat. These were big dreams, dreams that required more than just hard work. They needed a kind of belief that could move mountains, a belief he wasn't sure he had the strength to nurture. But looking at their bright, eager faces, he knew he had to try. "You can do anything," he said, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. "Anything you set your minds to. Just remember, it will take time, there will be struggles, but I will always be here for you. We will work together, and we will build that future." The girls smiled, the weight of his words settling into their hearts. From that day on, their dreams seemed a little less impossible, their path a little clearer. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but their father had shown them that with love and sacrifice, nothing was beyond their reach. As the years went by, Lillian's passion for science grew. She excelled in her studies, her curiosity about the world around her driving her to learn more. She built models of airplanes, studied the stars, and dreamed of one day becoming a scientist who could explore the unknown. Millie, too, thrived. Her natural talent for mechanics became more refined. She fixed broken appliances, built small machines, and spent hours reading about engineering. Mr. Duncan watched them both with a quiet pride, often helping them with their projects or just sitting by their side while they worked, offering support when needed. His love for them had shaped their lives in ways he could never fully explain. He had never wanted anything for himself. All he wanted was for them to have the opportunities he could never have. The community, despite its doubts, began to take notice. They saw the twins excelling in school, their talents undeniable. At parent-teacher meetings, teachers would often remark on how brilliant and hard-working the girls were. But the people who once mocked Mr. Duncan for selling his shop began to change their tune. "They're going places," they'd say. "That man was right to invest in his daughters." But to Mr. Duncan, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about giving Lillian and Millie the freedom to pursue their dreams, no matter how difficult the road. It was about seeing them thrive and knowing that his sacrifices had been worth it. One day, when Lillian was 12 and Millie was 11, Mr. Duncan sat them down once again. "I know you both have big dreams," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. and I'll do everything I can to help you reach them. But I want you to promise me one thing. No matter where you go in life, no matter how successful you become, never forget where you came from." Lillian and Millie exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. "We won't, Papa," they said together. As they looked at their father, they saw not just the man who had raised them, but the foundation of everything they were becoming. His sacrifices, his unwavering love, and his belief in them had given them the wings to dream big. And now it was their turn to fly. As the years passed, the pressure on Mr. Duncan grew heavier. Lillian and Millie were excelling in school, their talents shining brighter every day. But the cost of their education was becoming overwhelming. Despite his best efforts, Mr. Duncan's carpentry shop remained barely profitable. He worked longer hours, took on extra commissions from clients who needed furniture repairs, but still, there was never enough. Every penny he earned seemed to vanish before he could even save for the next month's bills. One cold autumn afternoon, after a long day of working on a large order of custom furniture, Mr. Duncan sat down at the kitchen table, his face drawn with exhaustion. The girls were at school, and the house felt quieter than usual. He opened the mail, hoping for something that might ease the financial strain, a letter from a potential client, an overdue payment. But all he found was another stack of bills. There was a notice from the local tax office. Unpaid taxes. Immediate action required. He dropped the letter onto the table, his hands shaking. The weight of his responsibility for Lillian and Millie seemed to crush him all at once. His mind raced as he thought about his options. There were no more loans to take out, no one else to turn to. He couldn't sell the house. He had already sacrificed the carpentry shop, and that was all he had left. There was only one thing he could do: cut back even further. That night, as the girls slept upstairs, Mr. Duncan sat alone in the dark. The house felt smaller, colder. He ran his fingers through his hair, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. The pressure of it all was suffocating. For the first time in a long while, doubt crept in, and for a fleeting moment he wondered if he had been wrong all along. Was it really worth it to sacrifice everything for their education? What if, after all of this, they never made it? What if they didn't succeed, and he had nothing to show for all the work he'd put in? The thought seemed to linger, dark and heavy. He couldn't help but wonder, had he been foolish to think that a dream could change their future? The next day, when the girls came home, their faces full of excitement, it felt like everything had shifted. Lillian ran to him, holding a letter from her school. "Papa, I've been selected for the science competition," she announced, her eyes wide with excitement. Millie, just behind her, held up a drawing of a new machine she had designed for her engineering class, a grin on her face as wide as her dreams. But Mr. Duncan, his heart heavy with worry, didn't share their enthusiasm. He smiled weakly, but it was obvious that something was wrong. The girls noticed immediately, the joy fading from their faces as they saw the tired lines etched into his brow. "What's wrong, Papa?" Lillian asked, her voice soft with concern. Mr. Duncan tried to hide the anxiety, but it was impossible. He sat them both down at the kitchen table, his heart aching with the weight of what he had to say. "Girls," he began, his voice rough, "I've been working really hard to make sure you have everything you need. But I don't know how we're going to pay for your schooling anymore. We've run out of options." The room fell silent. Lillian and Millie exchanged a glance, their faces filled with confusion. They didn't understand the full extent of the situation. but they could feel the tension in the air, the weight of their father's words hanging over them. "We might have to cut back on some things," Mr. Duncan continued, his voice strained. "I might have to take a less-paying job or even sell the house." He could feel his throat tightening as he said the words. Selling the house. It was the last thing he ever wanted to do. It was all he had left. The girls didn't say anything at first. They just sat there, their faces filled with concern, their young minds trying to process what their father was telling them. Millie, always the practical one, spoke up first. "Papa, we'll find a way. We'll work hard. We'll figure this out together." Lillian, too, nodded. "We're not going to give up. You've given us everything, and we're not going to let you down." Mr. Duncan tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The weight of it all was suffocating. But in that moment, as he looked at his daughters, so strong, so determined, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they were right. The next few weeks were the hardest of his life. Mr. Duncan took on whatever work he could find, odd jobs, repairs, whatever paid the bills. But it wasn't enough. His savings dwindled quickly, and soon he was faced with the harsh reality. He might have to sell the house. The thought was unbearable. He had worked so hard to build this life for them, and now it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. One afternoon, as he walked down the street after another fruitless day of searching for work, he passed the old storefront where his carpentry shop once stood. The window was empty now, the sign faded and forgotten. His heart ached as he thought about the shop, the place where he had spent years building furniture, working tirelessly to provide for his family. And now it was gone. All of it was gone. But just as he passed by, he heard a voice, a familiar voice, calling out to him. "Mr. Duncan, right? The carpenter?" It was a businessman from the local construction company, someone he'd done work for in the past. "I've got a few projects that could use your skills. We could use someone with your experience." Mr. Duncan's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe it wasn't the answer he'd hoped for, but it was a lifeline. He smiled faintly, nodding. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with quiet relief. "I'll take it." As he walked away, he felt a surge of hope, small but powerful. It wasn't over yet. It had been a long, grueling winter. The cold winds of hardship had blown through Mr. Duncan's life, and it seemed that no matter how hard he worked, the storms of financial struggle never stopped. He continued to scrape by, taking on odd jobs and hoping that, somehow, things would improve. But as each month passed, the weight of his sacrifices and the mounting bills became more and more unbearable. Lillian and Millie had grown into bright young women, their dreams larger than ever. Lillian was studying astronomy, while Millie excelled in engineering, both determined to make their father proud and achieve what seemed like the impossible. Mr. Duncan had always believed in them. But now, as he watched them work tirelessly to build their futures, the doubt that had quietly lingered in his heart began to grow. Had he given them enough? Had he sacrificed everything, his shop, his home, only to see them face the same struggles he had? One evening, after another long day of work, Mr. Duncan sat at the kitchen table, weary and defeated. The girls had left for school that morning, with the same bright smiles and big dreams, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was letting them down. Their school fees were due again, and he had no way to pay them. Would they have to quit? Would his sacrifices be for nothing? He thought about selling the house again, something he never wanted to consider, but it seemed like the only option left. Then the sound of the door opening broke his thoughts. It was late, much later than usual for the girls to come home. Lillian and Millie stood in the doorway, their faces beaming with excitement. But there was something different in their eyes, something deeper, more urgent. "Papa, we need to talk," Lillian said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. Millie stood beside her, her hands trembling slightly as she held a thick envelope. Mr. Duncan stood up, his heart beating faster, wondering if something had happened. "What is it, girls? Is everything all right?" Lillian handed him the envelope. "Open it, Papa. It's for you." He looked at them, confused, but his hands were already reaching for the envelope. Inside was a letter from a prestigious engineering university and an official letter from a space research foundation. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words. Both girls had been offered full scholarships to continue their studies in mechanical engineering and astronomy. But it wasn't just the scholarships that made his heart swell with pride. It was the note written at the end of the letter. "We wanted to make sure you're taken care of too, Papa," Lillian said, her voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't have gotten this far without you." Mr. Duncan's hands shook as he turned the letter over. A check for a sum far beyond anything he had ever imagined was attached. It was more than enough to cover all of their debts, their tuition fees for the next few years, and even pay off the bills they had accumulated. "This is for you, Papa." Millie's voice broke through his haze of disbelief. "We've been saving up from our internships, our work, every dollar, every penny. We saved it for you." Tears welled up in Mr. Duncan's eyes as he stood there, speechless. He had worked his entire life for this moment, the moment when he could give his daughters the world, and now they were giving it back to him. "No, I never expected this," he said softly, unable to believe what he was hearing. He reached out and pulled them both into an embrace, his heart so full that it felt as if it might burst. The tears flowed freely now, a mixture of pride, relief, and gratitude. His daughters had not only succeeded, but they were now taking care of him, the way he had always hoped. "This is everything," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I've worked for. It was all worth it." The girls, their faces shining with pride, hugged him back tightly. "Papa," Lillian said, her voice trembling, "we've done it. Together." In that moment, everything Mr. Duncan had sacrificed, the years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the endless doubt, seemed to vanish. His daughters had not just survived, they had thrived. And now their success was his success. He could see the future clearly now. The life he had always dreamed of for them was within reach. They would go on to achieve things far beyond what he had ever imagined, and he would be there, cheering them on every step of the way. As the girls stood there, laughing and crying with him, Mr. Duncan knew one thing for sure. This was the payoff he had worked for. This was the moment when all the sacrifices, every drop of sweat, every ounce of exhaustion, had led to something far greater than he could ever have imagined. His daughters had repaid him, not just with money, but with the knowledge that his love, his sacrifice, had truly made a difference in their lives. "I'm so proud of you both," he said, his voice full of pride and love. "I can't wait to see what you achieve next. The sky is the limit." And with that, the door to a new future swung wide open. The days that followed were filled with a quiet joy. Mr. Duncan no longer carried the weight of worry on his shoulders, and the house, once so full of tension and uncertainty, felt lighter. Lillian and Millie continued their studies. their futures growing brighter with each passing day. But more than anything, it was the small moments that mattered, the family dinners, the laughter that filled the rooms, the pride in his daughter's eyes that spoke volumes more than words ever could. For Mr. Duncan, the true reward of all his sacrifices wasn't the money or the scholarships. It was the simple knowledge that he had given them the chance to live lives of their own choosing. That, in itself, was priceless. One afternoon, as the girls sat at the kitchen table, poring over their textbooks, Mr. Duncan watched them from the doorway. Lillian's brow furrowed in concentration as she worked on her latest science project, and Millie was sketching designs for a new machine in her notebook. He smiled quietly, the warmth in his chest radiating outwards. It wasn't just their success that filled him with pride. It was the knowledge that they had become strong, capable women, the kind of women who would change the world. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Mr. Duncan looked at his daughters, his beautiful, brilliant daughters, and couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought them here. "I used to think that all I wanted was to see you both happy," he began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "But now, I realize something more. It wasn't just about giving you things or making sure you had everything. It was about giving you the chance to dream, to believe in yourselves, and to make those dreams come true." Lillian looked up from her plate, her eyes shining with understanding. Millie nodded, her fingers absently tracing the edges of her napkin. They had both grown up knowing the sacrifices their father had made, the years of hard work and struggle. But hearing him speak those words, words filled with so much love and hope, was more powerful than anything they had ever known. "You gave us more than we could ever ask for, Papa," Millie said softly. "You didn't just give us the chance to go to school. You gave us the strength to believe in ourselves. We're here because of you," Lillian added, her voice filled with gratitude. "Everything we've achieved, we owe to you. You were always there, even when things seemed impossible. You never gave up on us, even when you didn't know how we'd make it. That's the most important thing you've given us." Mr. Duncan felt a lump in his throat, but he held it back. His daughters were right. This was everything he had ever wanted for them. Their success was not just about education or careers. It was about building the future they deserved, a future they could be proud of. And that was enough. As he looked at them, something inside him clicked into place. He had lived his life with a quiet sense of purpose. Every sacrifice, every hardship, every moment of doubt, it had all led to this moment of peace, of knowing that his daughters were on their way to achieving things he had never dreamed possible. And he could rest easy, knowing that they would go on to achieve even more than he ever could have imagined. That night, as he tucked the girls into bed, he whispered softly, "You're my legacy, and I couldn't be prouder of you." The sound of their soft laughter filled the room, and Mr. Duncan smiled to himself, his heart full. He knew that the sacrifices had been worth it, every single one. He had built a life, not just for them, but with them. And now they were ready to go on and build their own futures, stronger and more capable than ever. As he closed the door quietly behind him and sat down on the couch, he let out a deep sigh, a sigh of contentment. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, he felt like the weight had lifted. The future was no longer uncertain. It was theirs to create. And with that, Mr. Duncan finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that his legacy was secure, and that his daughters would carry forward the lessons of sacrifice, love, and perseverance for generations to come. What's the biggest sacrifice someone made for you, or one you'd make for someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. These aren't just stories. They're reminders of the quiet heroes in our lives. If this one moved you, give it a like to let us know. And for more true stories that restore your faith in love, sacrifice, and family, hit that follow button. We tell them exactly how they happened and why they matter.